Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Eruvin Daf discusses the residence of an idol worshiper together with the Jews in a shared courtyard where the idol worshiper has a house in the courtyard and therefore has rights to use the yard, and one or possibly more Jews also have a right to use the yard. And again, the issue over here, of course, is carrying the yard on Shabbos. As we've seen before many times, Chazal have told us that we may not carry in a shared area on Shabbos because it looks like Rosh Hashanah, and people will get confused, and if you let them carry in a shared area, they'll end up carrying in Rosh Hashanah. What's the way out of it? There are three potential solutions. One, all the residents of the courtyard join in a conglomerate which then owns the yard, so it's only one thing, one entity owning the yard. Chazal said that doesn't apply to an idol worshiper. He's not allowed to join such a group. If he does, it messes it up. The other potential solution is that the residents or any one of them relinquishes his rights to use the yard, and then he's not considered to be owning part of the yard. That would take that person's concerns out. Again, Chazal said that this does not apply to an idol worshiper. The only one which applies to an idol worshiper is the third solution, and that is that the residents of the yard rent the rights to use the entire yard from an individual or a multiple individuals. That takes that individual out of the yard. He has nothing to do with it. This is the only thing you can do when there is an idol worshiper sharing the yard who has rights to use the yard. And therefore, that's the only solution. And the reason why Chazal did that is because they did not like Jews and idol worshippers living together in the same yard, because they did not want the Yidden to learn certain habits or behaviors from the idol worshippers. Now, we had seen in the Mishnah that there was a discussion where you need to do this renting of rights. It's where there's a idol worshiper in the yard. For sure, the question is there only one Jew in the yard, or there are two Jews in the yard? According to Rabbi Meir, even if there's only one Jew, he has to do the rental. According to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, only if there are two or more Jews do they have to do this rental. So the Gemara asks right away. Gemara says, Abaye bar Avin and Rav Chanina bar Avin were sitting and discussing, and Abaye was there with them. That's the regular Abaye bar Nachmani, and they were discussing what is pshat in Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov's opinion. Do they consider the residents of the idol worshiper in the yard to count as resident or not? I mean, I understand Rabbi Meir's opinion. He says that the residence of the idol worshiper counts as significant, and therefore if you have just one Jew and one idol worshiper, it's a jointly owned yard. The regular decree that you can't carry in a jointly owned yard applies, and therefore you got to get him out. The only way to get him out is by renting from him. Fine, but according to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, it only applies if there are multiple Jews there. So I don't understand. If the residence of the non-Jew counts, so then why do I not have to rent his space if there's only one Jew there besides for him? He should still have to rent the space from him. And if his residence does not count, so even if you have multiple Jews there, why should I care about his space? Let the Jews make an Erev Chatzeris, and the fact that the idol worshiper owns rights to the place is not a problem, because his ownership doesn't count as anything, doesn't count as a resident at all. So what does he hold? So the Gemara therefore first of all says that Abaye said, first of all, there's nothing to discuss. It's definitely clear that Rabbi Meir holds that the resident of an akum, of an idol worshiper in a courtyard, does not count as a resident at all. We had seen Abaye clearly says, Rabbi Meir clearly says that unlike a regular Jew, if he's not home, then his residence doesn't count as anything at all. It counts as if it was a barn for animals there. That's what his yard counts as. It's not considered a residence at all. Now, what then is the problem here? The problem is when Chazal made a rule, they did not want Jews and idol worshippers living together in the same yard, and therefore they said to them, you have to rent his rishus in order to make it clear that you cannot stay there in the yard with him. They really wanted the Jew to move out. So they made a rule, you have to rent from him. You cannot live together with him, with nothing to do with the Erev. You can't have residents together with an idol worshiper in the yard. You have to rent his space from him. That was the rule that they made. They wanted to do that in order to make sure that people would not be able to stay. They won't be able to carry on Shabbos unless they rent space from him, and they're going to try to rent space from him, and he's not going to want to rent it, and therefore the Jews are going to end up having to move out. Now, according to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, if there's only one Jew living there, It's a very rare scenario. Usually a Jew will not want to live by himself in a yard just one-to-one with an idol worshiper, because idol worshippers are murderers and it's a dangerous place to live. If, however, there are multiple Jews there, then he feels a little safer. So that's a more common scenario. Therefore, this entire Gzeira, this whole decree, only was ever made where there are multiple Jews there. If there's only one Jew, the decree was never made. According to every mayor, no, it does happen sometimes. Significant enough for the decree to apply there, and therefore, even if there's only one Jew, the decree does apply. And the rule is that the Jew has to rent the non-Jews, the idol worshippers, space in order to be able to carry there on Shabbos. Now, the Gemara turns to the subject of the idol worshipper himself, who's not going to want to rent space. The Gemara says, what exactly is the problem that he's not going to want to rent space? In order to understand what the problem is, we have to understand how this rental works exactly. So the Gemara says that that's actually a machlokes between Rav Chizda and Rav Sheshes. Rav Chizda says you have to do a real rental. You have to rent his full rights to use the yard to the extent that you would now be allowed to set up chairs and benches there. You're allowed to do whatever you want. The opinion of Rav Sheshes is no, you just have to be able to, you just have to symbolically rent his rights. You don't have to be able to legally actually fill the entire yard with furniture. That's not an issue. Now, the Gemara before that had considered a possibility that maybe the machlokes between Rav Chizda and Rav Sheshes is how much money do you have to give him? Do you have to give him a pruta, or do you have to give him less than a pruta? Pruta is the smallest coin. The Gemara rejected that because you cannot possibly hold that any halacha applying to an idol worshiper requires a pruta. Everybody agrees that idol worshippers halachos do not have any significance in a pruta. Any amount is significant as an idol worshipper. The Gemara brings a proof to that from a statement of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yaakov bar Giri in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that you can rent from idol worshiper for less than a pruta, and also if he steals, he's in violation of one of the 7 Noahide laws, Shavim Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, by stealing even less than a pruta. So that is not the issue. The issue is, do you have to actually retain rights to fill the yard with furniture, or is it enough to just have a symbolic rental? Either way, the Gemara says, what exactly is the reason that the idol worshiper will not want to rent his yard? Why would he have a problem renting it out? If the issue is that if the type of rental you have to do is a good one, like Rav Chizda says, you have to be able to fill the yard with furniture, so he may be concerned you're going to rent it from him and you're not going to give it back to him, and then he won't ever be able to use the yard again. But if it's just a symbolic thing, why would he not agree to do it every year of Shabbos? What's the problem? So Gemara says he's afraid that by your owning part of his yard, or the whole yard, he'll be susceptible to witchcraft that you are going to perform. And that's why he doesn't want to let you do it, therefore he's not going to allow it, and therefore you're going to end up having to move. The Gemara now moves on to discuss what happens when you have a courtyard which is actually completely occupied by idol worshippers, and this will contradict our Mishnah, and it'll take us into a discussion what happens when the idol worshippers are not home. So the Gemara brings a brisa, and the brisa quotes the same two opinions of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, but here we're discussing what happens when you have a courtyard which is totally occupied by idol worshippers. And the brisa says that there's no problem, carrying is completely allowed. Remember, the only problem with idol worshippers is that Chazal did not want the Jews to be living in the same yard as them. And therefore, if there are no Jews living in the yard, there's no problem. And a Jew is allowed to come and carry within that yard. It's not considered to be a yard that's shared by multiple people. We don't consider their residence at all. Now, the two opinions of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is, in what situation does a Jew create a problem here? Rabbi Meir says if there's one moving in, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says if there are at least two moving in. Now, the Gemara has a contradiction over here. The contradiction is, here you're saying that the Jew creates the problem. That means to say, the Jew who arrives in the chutzner, in the yard, makes it forbidden to carry around over there. But the Mishnah, which we had seen earlier, seems to indicate that it's the guy's presence, it's the idol worshipper's presence in the yard that creates the problem. And we don't let Jews carry there because there's an idol worshipper in the yard, and because of the gzeira which we made. The nafkamina is, the Brice's expression seems to indicate that it's forbidden for the Jew to carry only from the guy's house to the guy's yard, from the idol worshipper's house to the idol worshipper's yard. From the Jew's yard, from the Jew's own house to the yard is not a problem. The Mishnah, which we had seen at the beginning of the daf, actually at the end of the last daf, that Mishnah seems to indicate that the problem is not from the house of the idol worshiper, it's from the house of the Jew. So which is it? So the Gemara answers, the Mishnah is talking about where the idol worshiper is home. That's why it's forbidden to carry out of the Jew's house into the yard. This Bryce is talking about where the idol worshiper is not at home. In a situation like that, his residence is considered completely canceled, and it's not forbidden for the Jew to carry from his house into the yard. So now the Gemara asks, well, why should there be a difference between a Jew and a non-Jew? The implication over here is that there's a difference between whether the idol worshiper is home or not as to whether his property creates a problem. But if a Jew is home or not home, that doesn't create a difference. The same halacha applies. Either way, he creates the problem and he can't carry out of his house into a joint yard. Why should there be a difference? If people that are home are the only things that count, and people that are not home don't count, so then why should it make a difference if it's a Jew or if it's a non-Jew? So Gemara answers, the difference is what the reason for the problem is. When there's a Jew who has residence in the yard, the reason is that it appears like a Rishus Harabim. People are going to get confused if you allow them to carry into that. So even if he's not home, it still appears to be Rishus Harabim. He still owns part of it. However, by the idol worshiper, that wasn't the problem. The problem is that Chazal didn't want people to learn from his actions. If he's not home, there's no problem of people learning from his actions, and therefore that Isser is not created. Gemara now asks, how could you say that? We have another Mishnah which clearly says that there is no difference between a Jew and a non-Jew as far as this halacha. If they travel away from their home, it's still a problem, at least according to Rabbi Meir. So Gemara says that that's a different case. That's talking about where he traveled not too far and he could still come back on Shabbos, and where you may not notice that he came home. That's why that case is forbidden. Here we're talking about we're not going to come back. Okay, the Gemara now goes to the halacha l'maisa between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shmuel says that the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rav Huna says, I don't know about halacha, but that's definitely the minig. And Rabbi Meir says you should not teach people that the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. It does seem to be the custom, though, but you shouldn't teach that halacha l'maisa. Okay, now the Gemara goes to any situation where a Talmud paskins a halacha in front of his Rebbe. Now, we know the halacha is that a Talmud is not allowed to paskin halacha in front of his Rebbe, but that could be because he might be making a mistake if he has to rely on his own understanding. However, the Gemara asks, what about a situation where the halacha is clear, it's open shut? Is that a problem for a Talmud to paskin in front of his Rebbe because it's still a chutzpah, or is it not an issue? It's open shut halacha, so there's nothing to be concerned about. So Gemara says that Abaye asked Rav Yosef something like this: a halacha where there is one opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, which we know that the halacha is always like him. It's kav v'naki, we say about him. Every time he says something, that's the halacha. So, do we say that a Talmud is not allowed to say that halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov in front of his Rebbe, or that you're allowed to because there's no issue involved, it's clear, open shut? So Gemara says, Rabbi Yosef told Abaye, even something as straightforward as an egg cooked in kutach, which is also Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Kutach is a milky type of dish. So they asked Rav Chizda that question in the years that Rav Huna was alive, and Rav Chizda refused to answer as long as Rav Huna was alive, at least in his town, because Rav Huna was his Rebbe, even though that's an open shut case, which is also like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So Gemara says, a similar question and answer was Rabbi Yaakov bar Abba asked Abaye, something which you could just open a sefer and see the answer. It's written clearly, like if it's written in Megillas Tainis, a list of fast days. That's the straightforward thing. It's right there. Is that also something that the Talmud is not allowed to answer in front of his Rebbe? And he gave the same answer about the egg in Kutach. And Rav Chizda didn't want to pass him as long as Rav Huna was alive. So Gemara says that in Kafri, Rav Chizda did paskin halacha, even though Rav Huna was alive, because Kafri was not Rav Huna's town, and therefore it's not considered to be in front of Rav Huna.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.